I'm going to be doing a review of The Handmaid's Tale Season 6 because I have opinions as usual. Now, I know some people loved it, some people didn't love it, and I'm going to tell you why I thought it was a fabulous fizzle, okay? So I'm going to be really looking at this from a story perspective, looking at character arcs, and really discussing whether I thought this was a satisfying and fulfilling finish to what is a show that is so loved by so many people. So if you really love stories, storytelling, maybe you're a writer yourself, my channel has lots of tips and nuggets of information about crafting stories and the craft of writing. Now, the last thing I need to say before we start is that this video will contain spoilers. So if you have not watched the last season of The Handmaid's Tale, go and do that first and then come back and watch this video. So season 6 starts with June and Serena and their babies on a train from Canada fleeing all the way to Alaska. And the season really follows June's story going to fight with Mayday and bring down Gilead, and also Serena's story rejoining Gilead and trying to fight for the change that she wants to see in society, but also being drawn into chasing power for the sake of power. Now, over the course of the season, we also spend a good amount of time in Jezebel's, and we go back to the place where it all began with a little bit of nostalgia factor at the Red Center, and June finishing in the house where it all started as well. For context, I have been waiting for this final season to come out for what feels like a long time, and it feels like it's been a very hotly anticipated final season because it has such big boots to fill. In my opinion, all the previous seasons of The Handmaid's Tale have been of a consistently high quality. I listened to the audiobook first, which I really enjoyed. I think it was a really good story for an audiobook format. And then I binged all of the seasons. I just watched so much of this show when I was terribly sick in my first trimester of pregnancy. So watching a show like this while pregnant, many tears were shed. And even watching the finale, now that I have a beautiful toddler who is a girl, many tears were shed. I think as a mum, especially the mum to a daughter, it is just so heartbreaking what June goes through, especially in regards to Hannah. So this is a show that means a lot to me, and I've been following its journey for quite some time. So let's talk about my overall opinion. Overall, I really enjoyed watching this final season, and I think it was a good final season. I was a little bit disappointed with the ending, and I think this is probably just a matter of opinion. I know my mum loved it. I know lots of people loved it, but for me, it was just a little bit it's not what I would have done. I think the show did a good job at staying true to its to the feeling of what the show is. I think the show really does a good job of knowing itself. It has certain conventions, certain things that it does. It taps into a very specific genre and a very specific feeling, and this comes down to layering those, iconic modern songs over montages. It comes down to the monologues from June and the close-ups on her face, and it really has this sort of gritty feeling to the show that really effectively paints this world of Gilead, and the show has always done this very effectively. I think this final season followed that and did a good job of maintaining that feeling of Gilead. In this final season, I did feel myself getting a little bit itchy in those moments, and when I say itchy, I mean like this montage is going for 5 minutes, or this flashback is going for whatever, and it felt like this is wasting precious story time. We have to wrap up a lot in this season. Why does it feel so slow? But overall, I am glad that they stayed true to those conventions because it allowed the show to feel like The Handmaid's Tale all the way up until the end. And I also think that investing time in those emotional moments does allow for a bigger emotional payoff. So overall, I think the show did a good job of staying true to the feeling of the show. Overall, the characters felt really authentic to the characters. I really believed all of the characters, and I really enjoyed their journeys and following their journeys. I will say that for this final season, unfortunately, the stakes felt like they were a little bit lower, and I was hoping for the final season that they would feel higher, right? Moving towards this pinnacle of a climax, but they actually felt lower. I think a big part of this was the border hopping. I think in previous seasons we had spent entire seasons just trying to get to a border, let alone successfully crossing a border and the implications of that. And in this season it was like border hopping like no tomorrow. And I understand that June now has allies in high places and that these things might be a little bit easier, and we need to border hop to sort of progress the story along in new and different ways, but it just felt like a little bit too much. They were going back and forth and back and forth, and you would kind of think by now at this point, especially with June and Mayday at large, that all of the roads going across the border would have some kind of checkpoint or some kind of security or patrol, or they would have to at least be a little bit careful or go at nighttime. But they were going across in broad daylight. They weren't worrying about covering their faces. If she was with Nick or Lawrence, it wasn't a matter of let's be secret about it. It just kind of all felt a little bit too easy when it came to border crossing, and it never really explained why. Whereas in previous seasons we had seen massive amounts of military personnel on those borders, and it had been very, very difficult. Unfortunately for me, this felt like it undermined the struggle of those previous seasons and everything that the characters achieved to try and cross the border in the past when it was very, very difficult, because now all of a sudden it felt much easier. I think in the earlier seasons there was a big emphasis on the eyes, right, who were almost undercover as other roles such as drivers or this or that, and you never quite knew who to trust. You never knew if your friend or your neighbor was going to piously dob you in and get you in trouble. So you were always sort of just cautious and never knew who you could speak to, who you could trust. There was a big element of secrecy and danger, and I felt like maybe it's just because we're getting to know the characters more and us as audience members know who we can trust, but it just felt like the stakes and the danger factor was a lot lower. Things felt a little easier for our characters, and I was hoping that the struggle would ramp up in this final season. I think that spending so much time in New Bethlehem this season also contributed to that, because New Bethlehem did feel a lot safer, just existing there, and the scenes that happened there, it felt safer. And I did really like New Bethlehem in terms of the story and what that provided sort of for Gilead in a political, financial, economical kind of global diplomatic thing. Like, I really liked it, but a lot of this final season took place in New Bethlehem, and I feel like that again lowered that danger factor and lowered the stakes. And the last thing for me that contributed to the lowering of stakes was Hannah's absence during this season. I was actually quite surprised by how absent Hannah was during this season. She wasn't really in it at all, and for me it kind of felt like June could be completely fearless because she had nothing left to lose. There was nothing that Gilead could do to really torment her anymore because they had already completely removed Hannah from the equation. And I think in previous seasons they had used June's children sort of as her kryptonite to access a vulnerability within June that we didn't really get to see this season. There was no rock bottom low moment where they were using Hannah against her because Hannah was not present. They did show flashbacks of Hannah, but again, that can only really do so much in my opinion. I would have really loved to have seen Hannah in this season. Even like as just an idea off the top of my head, when June was captured and about to be executed and she has that meeting with Wharton, it could have been cool if June convinced them like to bring Hannah in and get to say goodbye to her child and see her one last time before she goes to be executed. And then Gilead thinking, oh, June's definitely going to die, like we'll grant this one thing or whatever. And for June and Hannah to have had like one small meeting in the show. I think that would have just made it feel a little bit more satisfying seeing them together one last time, because the last time that we saw them together it feels like quite a while ago. And it would have been nice to have seen Hannah, even just for a small moment, not to have having them rescue her or to have any kind of conclusion like that, but just to have some kind of meeting, or even for Luke to have visually sighted her. It would have felt so satisfying after how hard he had worked towards that, and it would have been even more heartbreaking watching them whisk Hannah away yet again. So I was a little bit disappointed by Hannah's absence, and it did feel like for me that contributed to the lowering of stakes. Like there was nothing else for June to lose, that they couldn't use this to hurt her anymore. Okay, we're going to move on to the characters, their arcs, and the conclusion. In general, I feel like this must have been a very hard show to wrap up, because you're either going to have to wrap everything up and do way too much in one season, or not wrap it up at all and just leave everybody with no closure. They kind of tried to go for an in-between, okay? So they didn't completely take down all of Gilead and get Hannah back. It would have been too much, but they didn't, not accomplish anything. They took down a city, right? Janine got her child back. So there were some small wins, but the war was still ongoing. I think a part of the reason this decision may have been made is to open it up to spin-offs, which we already know are kind of in the works. For me, it's always a hard decision to make, but as a viewer, as an audience member, I do love closure. I love a bit of closure. I would probably err on the side of wanting more closure and then one or two things left loose, rather than one or two things tied up with most of it open-ended, if that makes sense. So firstly with June, I liked her ending, even though I would have personally loved to have seen her get Hannah back. I thought it was really great how they ended it with her writing the book, and that's as somebody who has listened to the book as an audiobook, so I haven't read it. And yeah, I know that the book is worded and written in such a way that it is June telling this story and recording her experience, and so for me it felt like the only way to do it, right? Coming full circle to June then recording her experience. And people who haven't read the book won't know this, and I'm pretty sure it will be the same in the book, but this is what happened when I listened to it on the audiobook. At the very, very end, it finished, and it was all sort of from June's point of view, and it finished. And at the very end, there was like a section where it was a male academic professor who was many years into the future giving like an analysis and a breakdown of The Handmaid's Tale, which had been apparently, found on a recording device. Basically tearing it apart, being like, we have no way to know if this was actually a handmaid, we don't know if it was all the one person, these tapes were found, we don't really know what order it goes in, we've pieced them together, but it's not a credible or reliable source for looking at, the historical Gilead time. And for me, that was such a little gift at the end of this book, right? I listened to the whole thing and it was June telling this story, blah, 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 blah. And at the end, to have some man come in and basically be like, we've got no way of knowing if this is, and pretty much tearing it to shreds. So the fact that June was recording it on this recording device, it felt so right. And it really felt like it was paying homage to the book. So I really, really liked that element. I loved that June was reunited with her mum. I loved that, she forgave Serena. That felt right to me. I know some people were saying, oh, Serena better not get a redemption arc, blah, 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 blah. I felt that June needed to forgive Serena, and I felt that was right. For me, the only thing that didn't feel great was how things ended with her and Luke. I think her and Luke had been through so much, and Luke had always been so kind and patient and forgiving and understanding of June's trauma and everything that she'd had to go through. They had gone through so much, and even during this final season, they had moments where, they said, is Hannah the only reason we're still together? And they said, no, it's not. And I really felt this unconditional love between them. I loved their relationship. And, you know, the way that Luke had to kind of come to grips with the whole Nick thing, like, it was a very complex thing, and I think they always presented it really well. And I think June and Luke always did such a good job of being so tight. Like, when they are tight, oh, what a great relationship. And in the end, it all fizzled down to sort of one conversation of them being like, yeah, maybe we'll be together when all this is over, who knows, and we're both gonna go get Hannah, but we're gonna do it completely separately and see you later. Like, what? Like, man, they didn't even kiss, they didn't say I love you, they kind of like broke up, they kind of like got divorced, and were like, maybe things will be different later, but we're both just fighting now. Like, for me, that did not feel satisfying. I really loved Luke's journey this season of going from more of a passive kind of person to being the fighter. I loved that, but I would have loved to have seen June and Luke ending as fighters together and fighting together for Hannah. It felt like they were together and then they just kind of went their separate ways. I feel like Luke would have not wanted to leave Nicole. I'm not sure June would have wanted to leave Nicole, really. So there was something that just didn't feel quite right about it to me. I just needed something a little bit more. I felt a bit sad. It was just like, anyway, what did you think about their relationship? I just felt like, that's how I felt. Okay, so moving on to Moira. I liked Moira's journey during the season, but again, I don't feel like she got a proper ending. It was just kind of like in that final episode, it was all over, and then she was going to go with Luke. It was almost like Luke and Moira were on more of the same wavelength and should have been together. Like, if they're going to do that, just make it a thing, make them be together. I know Moira's a lesbian or whatever, but it just kind of felt like we didn't even see her. We didn't see June say goodbye to her. We did see her in this like alternate reality flash thing to the karaoke bar where all of the other handmaids were there and Janine had her eye. I really, really loved that scene. I thought that was really moving and such a beautiful way to bring in those other handmaids like Brianna and Alma and all of those, but that was kind of like Moira's last moment, and I really would have liked to have seen June and Moira have some kind of thing before they also parted ways. Okay, Commander Lawrence, I love this character and I was so sad that he had to die, but it felt right. Again, a very complex character. I felt like he couldn't have just survived because he had done terrible things and what would have happened to him. But yeah, so it kind of felt like I kind of knew he was going to have to die, but in a good way, doing something good. So I thought that whole thing with the plane, it was really great. For me, Nick then getting on the plane was a little bit like, similar to the Moira thing where I think June and Nick needed to have a final moment or a final goodbye. It was just a little bit anticlimactic, where Nick just sort of like did a look and then he got on the plane and then he died. Do you know what I mean? Nick was always like on this fence having to make a choice between, you know, this or that. And in the end, he did make a choice, but I would have liked it to have been a stronger choice. If he's going to choose the baddies and be a baddie, I would have loved to have seen him just be a real baddie in the end. But it still just always felt like this fence sitting. I would have loved to have him to have had one last kind of moment with June, and you know, maybe June is saying don't get on the plane and he goes no, like I'm getting on the plane, something. It just kind of was all just like too easy in a way. I think that goes into trying to do so much in one season. It was very much like the whole season was, okay, let's cut the head off the snake, let's just do one thing that will kill all the high commanders, and they did the bomb on the plane. But it felt too easy. The plane took off and it worked and they exploded, and that was that. And we didn't even see any of the cool battle. It was all just sort of alluded to. I would have liked to have seen the cool stuff. I think that was a big thing in this season, that they alluded to a lot of cool stuff that would have been good to see, but they didn't actually show it. And they spent time on a lot of things that were a little bit slower or boring. And again, maybe that ties into the genre and that whole thing of knowing the show. But, you know, I would have liked to have seen some of these things. So yeah, Nick, I was a little bit disappointed, but I do think I think he had to die as well. And I'm glad that they didn't give him a redemption, if that makes sense. I was kind of like, I thought that was interesting. It would have been a bit naff if he'd have lived and June and him, whatever, you know. I think he had to die. Okay, we're going to talk about Serena. Serena, I feel like, unfortunately, didn't change enough for me. It was kind of like painful watching her make the same mistakes over and over and over again, and I feel like this has been happening for multiple seasons now, where she does something, she kind of learns a little bit and makes a little bit of character progression, and then she gets an opportunity to just go right back to where she was, and she takes it and she's learnt nothing. And the amount of times this has happened where she's like, oh no, June, you are right. Oh no, I hate you, June, you're silly. Oh no, June, you are right. Oh no, I hate you, June. It's like this character is going in circles, and that happened again this season. I cannot believe that she married that guy. Oh my gosh. And I was kind of hoping this would then lead to that ultimate moment where she gets out of the cycle and she finally learns. But she doesn't even really do that. I think Serena needed to kill that guy, right? Going up in the plane and the bomb going off, like I said, it was too easy. Serena needed to kill this guy. She needed to learn that they were the bad guys. And I think she needed to have some personal moment where she stepped up and she learned her lesson, and she actually made some character growth. But in the end, June once again just pried the information out of her, and you know, she was even defending this guy up until the very last moments. You know, she says, you're asking me to put a target on my husband's back. What do you mean? You just had this whole thing where you found out he was a dangerous psycho and you left his house and what are you talking about? Like, she was defending him to the last moment, clinging to this, you know, idea of Gilead, and it was just kind of painful to watch. But I did like the ending where she kind of just had to be a mother and be okay with just being that. I think that it was kind of satisfying going from her having all this power and not being able to have a child to her having a child but not being able to have any of the power. It was a complete 180, and so therefore for me it felt really satisfying for her just having to learn to let go of all of the other stuff. You know what? Who cares about politics? Who cares about social change? Who cares about power? I'm a mum and I waited so long for this. I wanted this so badly. This was the whole point. So can I let go of everything else and just be a mum? That was kind of like a nice ending to me. You know, I liked that she had that moment with June. Again, I would have liked some other characters to have had that moment, like I've spoken about Moira and Nick. I like that Serena did get that moment, but it felt a little bit repetitive because it felt like she had a lot of those moments with June where she was like, oh, please forgive me, I messed up, and then June does, or whatever, and then she completely just you know. So I'm still not sure if Serena's really learned her lesson. I'm not sure if she was offered the opportunity to join Gilead again. I'm not sure that Serena has really made character change or character progress, but I did like her story and I did like her ending, and for me it felt right. Okay, talking about Aunt Lydia and Janine. Aunt Lydia, I loved that she kind of became a goodie, kind of, and she let the handmaids go, and then when she, you know, had the noose around her neck, it was so satisfying when she was like, you know, forgive these handmaids, you know, because they have been prisoners of godless men, or whatever she says. And I was like, yes, like, you know, this is a character who again is so complex. All of these characters are so complex. She really believes she's doing the right thing, and she believes in what Gilead stands for, but she can also see the corruption and the atrocities that these men have committed against the handmaids, and can kind of recognize to some degree that she has been a part of it, that she has been handing over these women to be, you know, raped and abused and, you know, all of these things. And in terms of Janine, so Janine's story for me was probably the most disappointing one. Again, like Serena, how I think Serena should have killed Wharton and had that, you know, satisfying moment. I think that Janine should have killed Commander Bell, 100%. I think Janine has been a bit of a damsel in distress for a long time, and I do understand that that's her character, right? But I think it would have been nice to see a bit more character progression from a lot of these people. It would have been nice to see Janine progress from a damsel in distress, somebody who always needs to be sort of told what to do and how to do it and needs saving, to somebody who can save themselves. But again, the entire season, June is just saving Janine. June rocks up at Jezebel's and saves Janine, and Janine says, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much. We've been waiting this. It's so great to see you." And then June rocks up at Commander Bell's house and saves Janine, and Janine says, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much." And even at the very end, when Janine gets her child back, it doesn't really feel like Janine has done anything to earn that. It's like June is called and June goes, and it's sort of like, again, June's coming there to save them. And so I would have liked to have seen something from Janine. I think that, there were moments of it. I loved when she, trashed the thing at Jezebel's and threw it back in Aunt Lydia's face. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, like what was stopping Janine from stabbing Commander Bell in the eye. I know they were like abusing her and all that, but she could have done it. She could have had a moment of, I'm going to rise up and I'm going to be the commander of my own destiny. But she was just waiting to be saved the entire time. I did feel like Janine needed to get her kid back. I feel like her kid was young enough that, they're going to be okay and they're going to go and have a good life, and Janine needed that kid. But I would have liked to have seen Janine, have a bit more of a say and be a bit more active in the journey to getting her kid back. Again, it felt all too easy, like the bomb in the plane in the sky. Everything felt a little too easy, like it needed to be earned a little bit more. June goes and just stabs Commander Bell in the eye. Easy. There was no altercation. There was no tension. It was just stab him in the eye. In the very last episode, with no explanation, Naomi gives Janine her child back. It wasn't earned. They just rocked up, and it was not explained why or how. It's kind of alluded that maybe Aunt Lydia pulled some strings and, wanted to do this for Janine, but it was not explained. Naomi did not seem happy about it. Janine wasn't really active in it. It was just kind of handed to people on a silver platter. And I was like, you had this entire season to build this up and, do something with it, and everything just felt easy and wasn't really explained or earned. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I felt. I would have kind of loved it if, Naomi brought the kid and said, the last thing Lawrence said to me was, we have to look after her, we're her parents now, and, really, I'm not her parent, you are. And, maybe Commander Lawrence, left some lasting impression in Naomi's mind or whatever, but it just wasn't explained even at all, and it didn't feel satisfying to get the kid back, because it was just handed to them on a silver platter. So this is this whole kind of thing of, the characters didn't go through enough to earn the resolution. It didn't feel like it was, a part of the story. It just kind of felt like some afterthought for an aftermath kind of thing in that final episode. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Emily. I was so disappointed with Emily, and I was waiting for her to come back because I really, really loved her whole story. And when she went off and disappeared and went to go fight, that was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna come back at the last moment and save them all. She's gonna do something. I've been waiting for this moment. And through all of the, big finish sections with the fights and all this, that, she wasn't there at all. And then she just shows up at a shop window in the last episode, has one conversation with June, and then that's all. I'm like, oh, dude, again, I'm looking at this from a story perspective about creating satisfying story arcs and resolutions. And you know what would have been more satisfying? If June was at her lowest of lows, whether it's when she's getting executed or whether she's trapped in Jezebel's, and then who should appear but, Emily in a Martha disguise, and she, talks about, the years she's been undercover and blah, 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 and she saves June, and, June had this one ally in a place that she would never expect, and it kind of ties into the story, but it wasn't tied into the story at all. It felt like there was no effort to tie it into the story. It felt like she was there because they had to explain it, and they had one big conversation where they explain it, but it didn't really mean anything. And I think the best way I can explain these things is like, if it didn't happen, would it affect anything? If that thing with Emily, that whole scene, conversation moment didn't happen, would it affect anything? No. So like, what's the point? You know what I mean? If Janine didn't get her kid back in the end, would it have affected anything that happened in the... No. Like, a lot of these things happened, and it was just kind of like plonked in this final episode. This final episode really didn't even feel like a part of the season. It felt like an entire final episode as like an aftermath, which in theory should add like closure and, a feeling of satisfaction, but it didn't really. It just felt like all of these things just being given to us with a voiceover explaining it. Oh yes, the battle went for 19 days and this happened and this happened. It's like, show us, that's all the cool stuff. You could have spent the last 2 or 3 episodes like showing us, but instead we just spent loads of time in Jezebel's. We just spent loads of time walking around the forest and having flashbacks that didn't, you know what I mean? Anyway, so they are my thoughts on the characters. So yeah, a lot of opinions, I always do, but most of it is good stuff. Like, I did feel like so many of the characters were like, and it felt good. There was just a couple of little things that felt just like unsatisfying to me. That's the best way that I can say it. So just to tie in a few last things that kind of carry on from a lot of what I've been speaking about. The aunt, who was like the CIA agent or whatever, who'd been undercover at the Red Center, she was awesome and I loved her, but again, like, it was just handed on a silver platter. Oh, what do we need in this moment? We need somebody who's a good guy. Oh, here's one. We'll just explain that they've, been undercover and blah blah blah. Oh, that's cool, but like, show us. Do you know what I mean? I would have in a ideal world, I would have loved to have like a whole standalone episode where you see her like prepping for this mission to go in and become an aunt, and then spending all that time like practicing and researching and going into the Red Center, and the moral conflict of having to do these things to the handmaids in order to gain the trust of the other aunts. Like, that would have been so compelling and awesome to see, but it was completely just absent and alluded to. It all felt very convenient. I personally would have loved to have seen our characters, even June in particular, spend a little bit more time in these places that we know from earlier seasons, as a bit of that like nostalgia factor, because it's the end, but it also just would have been better for the story, I feel. When June and Moira went undercover, I would have liked to have seen them spend more time in the Red Center, like more time in these places. As I spoke about at the beginning, it would have raised that danger factor. You could have gone into things a little bit more with the undercover aunt. I felt like the whole plot point about the letters didn't really go anywhere. Janine gives them these letters and say, you must get these out, whatever the cost. And then Nick ends up getting the letters and it's not really explained, and then all of the Jezebel people are killed. And it didn't really go anywhere. I would have either liked something to have come of the letters. I would have liked to have seen Wharton reading the letters if he did get his hands on them. Like, if Nick gave them over in that moment when he gave away Jezebel's, I would have liked to have seen the letters be the evidence of that and the cause of that. And I also would have liked to have seen Janine find out that these letters were the cause of all of her friends being killed. I would have liked to have seen Janine feel betrayed by June. I loved it when, June went back to Mayday and had to say, oh, I trusted the wrong person. I trusted Nick and he got all of these people killed. And she kind of had to live with that, but there was no consequences for her relationship with Janine. I would have liked Janine to have felt like, June, I trusted you with these letters. I said you have to get them out at any cost, and you completely betrayed my trust. That would have been more interesting to me. The whole letters thing, there was a lot of time spent on it and it didn't really go anywhere. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the wedding. So for me, I just didn't feel like it 100% made sense, and I think the characters were a little silly. So basically they said that they were going to do this whole thing at the wedding, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a great idea. And they're going to put stuff in the cake, and I was like, this is a great idea. They're going to poison everyone, right? They're going to put poison in the cake. Why did they not put poison in the cake? It would have been so good. It would have tied into the poisonings that have happened in previous seasons. It would have killed everyone who was at that wedding who ate the cake. And they usually, they often don't offer the treats or the nice things to handmaids, so the handmaids then would have survived, or they could have hidden the cake like they ended up doing anyway. Why did they not poison the cake? They put stuff in the cake to make everyone fall asleep, but people fall asleep every night anyway. I don't understand why they couldn't have distributed the knives to the handmaids and then said, okay, go and kill your commander in your sleep. Yes, there's a higher element to risk, like the commander waking up, but literally they could have just killed the commanders in the sleep. The whole cake thing was a bit pointless. And then to do the whole cake thing and have this one night where you're gonna take back the city, they didn't kill Wharton, the leader of all of it. Nobody went to kill Nick. Maybe it's because I can't even think of a reason. If you're gonna do this and have this night of terror, kill the people in charge. Do you know what I mean? They prioritize going to get Belle and rescue Janine, and it's fair enough, but if you're gonna do this whole cut the head off the snake thing, cut the head off the snake. Then they had to have this whole bomb on the plane situation, but they really could have made better use of this night. So yeah, the wedding just didn't make sense to me, but let me know if I'm missing something here. If I'm missing something, I must be missing something. I don't know why they didn't poison the cake. Anyway, that is my thoughts about The Handmaid's Tale Season 6. I'm such an opinionated person. I don't know why. I feel so many things about the things that I watch. And it's not because I don't like it. It's I say it out of love. I just really am passionate about analysing story, and analysing what I feel about the story as a viewer, as an audience member, because it really helps to inform the sort of stories that I want to write. My two big takeaways are, I always know that people say an ending should feel surprising but inevitable, right? So unexpected, but when it happens, it's oh, of course. So that's what I sort of mean when I talk about a satisfying ending. Things that feel oh yeah, of course, oh yeah. And there was many moments where I had that in The Handmaid's Tale, and yes, a few moments that did not have that for me. And the other thing is just about character progression and character growth. A thing that frustrated me about a lot of these characters is that they did not grow or make progression, and I found that personally frustrating, and I've spoken about that a lot, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It makes me frustrated because I want these characters to learn, of course, but it's making me feel something, and I think that is just as valid. If a show makes you feel frustrated or makes you feel a certain way, if it's a strong feeling, I think that show is doing something, right? And doing something and making you feel something is better than making you feel nothing and making you just feel well, I don't care at all. So the show's decision to have some of these characters not grow or not progress very well may have been an intentional decision, and it is really interesting. It is interesting when characters don't progress or don't grow, sometimes just as interesting as when they do. And I can't remember the quote exactly, but there's something that's the difference between comedy and tragedy is, one is where the characters do grow and change, and a tragedy is when characters don't grow or change. And I think about that a lot. It is quite tragic when a character does not grow or change or learn from their mistakes. And so I think a lot of The Handmaid's Tale is very tragic, and so I'm not necessarily saying these things as a negative thing. It's just interesting, and all of this is just interesting. So overall, I really, really enjoyed the season. I am absolutely devastated that it's over because there is so much more I want to see. I want to see him take down all of Gilead. I want to see him get Hannah back. And again, it's making me feel something. It's making me hungry for more. So really, it has done a very, very good job. I know there are some spin-offs in the works. I would certainly like to see more stuff from this world. It's the kind of thing that can't go on forever, and sometimes less is more, but I love this story, and I am a very, very passionate feminist. So that is my review of The Handmaid's Tale Season 6. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Maybe you loved it, maybe you hated it, maybe you passionately disagree with much of what I've said, or maybe you agree. Let me know, and I will see you in the next video.